And welcome everybody to this alta event. So I'm really delighted to be here and sharing this event, and I'm delighted to introduce my colleague Stefanie Reissner. Stefanie is a reader at Newcastle University Business School, where I work as well, and she develops fascinating research, especially about how people experience and their experiences in and around organizations, and especially through language and storytelling, which I find fascinating. And today's talk is, like Ross said, very relevant and timely and important to all of us, probably, in terms of understanding how to manage the boundaries between work and non-work. So we thought that this would be a really relevant topic for especially the context of the pandemic, where many of us are working from home, or we may have been furloughed and are preparing to come back to a much more hybrid workplace and working environment. So I'm really curious to hear what Stefanie has found out and what the research is saying about this topic. So thank you very much for accepting our invitation, Stefanie. And over to you. Thank you.
Thank you, Anna. That's very kind. So, thank you for inviting me. Thank you for having me today. I've deliberately entitled the talk, How Do You Manage the Work-Non-Work Boundary? Because I think it's something that a lot of us have found to be really relevant, particularly in the last year when many of us have been working from home. Probably more so than previously. And also as we move forward from this pandemic, because I'm hearing lots of noises from everywhere with organizations finding they can save a lot of cost if more people work from home, but also employees saying, actually, I'm not sure I would want to go back to the office full time. So I'm expecting large scale changes in the way in which we perceive work, and also when and where we do work. And I think all that flexibility raises important question about this all important work-non-work boundary, and associated with that, our work-life balance. So I was fortunate enough to receive funding to research flexible working. The research started in 2016. And we've just had our first paper published from that study, which is entitled Configurations of Boundary Management Practices Among Knowledge Workers. And it's some ideas underpinning that paper, but also some research findings that I am going to introduce to you today. But in addition, I'm inviting you to use the new ideas I'm talking about today to also reflect on your practices and reflect on what is working for you and what isn't working. So the areas where you may want to make changes as much as possible, but also the new practices developed in the last year of enforced home working that are working and that you may wish to retain. And I'm really looking forward to the question and answers later on, as I'm keen to hear what you are making of this. So the plan for the next 20, 25, 30 minutes is I'm going to offer you a reflection on enforced home working during COVID-19 lockdown. So working from home is nothing new. It's something that a lot of people have been doing for a number of years. But what I'm going to propose here is that actually there is something quite specific about COVID-19 lockdown and the way in which we had to work from home and experiment and try just to make things work as much as we can, and how that might differ from previous situations. I'm then going to introduce you to boundary management theory. This is a sociological theory, which I think will help to explain why we're having such a wide range of responses to working from home during COVID-19. Then I'm going to talk a bit about these configurations of boundary management practices before inviting you to reflect on your own boundary management practices. And then we move on to discussion, question and answers. I hope this sounds okay to you. I don't just want to talk at you all the time. So please do think about what you're doing, how what I'm talking about reflects or not what your experiences with home working have been or what they may be as you move forward. Now, in conversation with colleagues, with students, with friends, but also looking through media reports, we seem to have quite a wide range of responses. Some people love working from home and would love to continue doing it full time. Others absolutely hate it and want to go back to the office as soon as that becomes possible. I think the context of this enforced home working during COVID-19 lockdown certainly contributes to those who are desperate to go back to the office. First of all, it was enforced. There was no choice. And certainly at Newcastle University, the buildings were shut. They were out of use. You couldn't physically get in. So you actually didn't have any option. Whereas pre-pandemic, it was often people's choice where they said, actually, I do want to work more flexibly. I do want to have a day away from the office, maybe 2 days a week, so that I can find a better work-life balance for myself. Also, pre-pandemic, we could work wherever we wanted. So people could work in co-working spaces, in cafes, in libraries, wherever they could find a space to work. Whereas during the pandemic, it was linked or limited to working from home. And as I'm going to explain a bit later on, that's a real problem for some people because home is there for relaxing and doing leisure activities and having fun and not for work. A lot of us, I think, face some temporal constraints. And according to various studies I've come across, women have borne the brunt of all the other stuff that goes on in people's lives, like housework and for parents, childcare, homeschooling, but also other caring commitments, for example, of the disabled and the elderly. So I think we as women have really struggled, particularly when the schools were off, with other stuff infringing the time that we normally spend on work. And many of us will have had much longer working days simply because there were kids knocking on the door or just barging in, "Mummy!" and just distracting us from our work, taking up time. And that just meant the working day became longer and longer. I think a lot of people face spatial constraints. So not everyone's got a dedicated workspace at home. And even if they do, the challenge of having not just one person at home, but maybe 2 or 3 or 4 people all grappling for space where they can be on calls or just focus and concentrate on tasks was not found everywhere. And then, of course, there are all the technological issues that a lot of us have been facing. Oh, sorry, my broadband's down. Broadband can only cope with 1 person on a call and not 2 or even more. There were issues around technology. So it really was quite a difficult situation. Whereas if you request flexible work and you work from home, you plan for these things and you get things in. And then also our established routines have very much been disrupted. And I think particularly the routines that are normally associated with getting ready for work, leaving the house, the commute, however much we may hate it and moan about in usual times, was missed. Sort of that time, that distance that gets between home and work, and then in the evening, the other way around, getting us from work and being able to switch off on the commute home to then being fully at home. So there's been lots of things going on. And I do think that boundary theory, which was developed in the mid-1990s by the American sociologist Christina Nipperding, helps us to make sense of what's been going on and why for some people it worked beautifully and for others it was a real struggle. So the premise of boundary theory is that we have two life domains. Well, certainly the majority of us, I think, do. And one is called work. So that's everything we do in order to earn money, to keep us busy, to keep us fulfilled, whatever it might be. Usually it's working for money to keep some food on the table and keep the heating switched on. But then there is also a part of our life that consists of what Nipperding at the time called home. I prefer a broader definition, hence the term non-work. So it encapsulates everything that is not work. So it's time we spend with our family, time we spend in our home, housework. It's time we spend on our hobbies, on keeping fit, keeping healthy, keeping sane, whatever that might be. Whether that's going for a walk, running, cycling, playing an instrument, singing in a choir, volunteering in a church, whatever it might be. And the idea then is that once we've got these two domains, they can have different relationships. So Nipperding studied laboratory workers in the US. So people who couldn't work flexibly, who couldn't necessarily work from home. But even so, the findings very much resonate with what I found in my research and also upon reflection on what happened during lockdown. So she looked at how people, through their behaviors, draw that line between what's work and what isn't. And she found that one group of these laboratory workers she studied had certain behaviors. So they wouldn't have any pictures of their loved ones on their desk. They would have a work diary that was exclusively for work. They had a special set of keys for the office, for the lab. They wouldn't socialize or be friends with their co-workers. They might go to a leaving do, but that is where social contact with their co-workers ended. They would come to the lab in the morning and then leave in the afternoon, and that was that. They wouldn't come in the evenings or on weekends, so they had a very clearly bounded working day, and they would never take any work home. And this group she called segmenters, people who are trying to segment, to clearly delineate what is work and what isn't. And they did that through the three structuring devices of time, space, and objects. So time is my working day, one consistent block. Space is work takes place in the lab, or for many of us might be the office. And objects are things like photos, keys, diaries. In our day and age, probably more something like this: mobile phone, tablet, laptop, whatever technological device we're using. But then Nipperding also found another group, and she noticed that some of her laboratory workers behaved very differently. So they'd come in the morning to the lab, then they disappear for a while, maybe meet someone over lunch, then come back, then maybe leave again to pick up the kids, then maybe come back and work till 8 or 10 at night. Also people who would take paperwork home to finish at home rather than staying longer in the lab, would come in at the weekend to finish off work and catch up on stuff that they may have missed during the week, whose workplace was littered with personal objects, who just had one set of keys, one set of diary, notebook where everything was in. But also these people, she noticed, were socializing with their colleagues. So they would visit each other at home. They may even go on holiday with one another. And she called that group integrators. So it's people for whom really this idea that we have two very distinct life domains doesn't really apply. So for them, life and work and non-work just is sort of more or less the same. It's integrated. It takes place in sort of almost alongside one alongside the other. Now, what's central to Nipperdeng's argument is that these people really have this picture in their mind of work and home being very different for the segmentors, and work and home being very much integrated for the integrators. But if a segmentor is asked to behave in a more integrated fashion or vice versa, they really struggle and they will experience conflict. And a nice illustration, which I think is probably more relevant to today's talk, is Duxbury et al. Study. They were looking at what happens when an organization introduces a work-related mobile phone scheme. And you can look at the date. So at the time, that was a big thing. And they noted that, yeah, for some segmentors, that was not an issue because they said, right, this is a work phone, work stops for me at 5 or 6, that's it. Integrators didn't have an issue because they don't think about the boundary in similar ways. But there was this group who felt they were obliged to use that phone beyond the normal working day because work, the employer had paid for it, and therefore they were almost expected to use it. And that category of people they called struggling segmentors. So they found that these people really experienced conflict because it's not the way they wanted to work, but they felt obligated to do so. So in this paper, Configurations of Boundary Management Practices, my colleagues, Michael Izag and Donald Hislop and I, we drew on this idea of boundary management strategies, segmentation and integration that Nipperdeng put forward. And our study involved 28 people working flexibly, some of whom were employed, others were working freelance or were entrepreneurs. They were in different industries. So we had people from academia, from law, from marketing, from HRD, so a wide range of professions. And we actually found, yes, Nipperdeng was absolutely right. There were some people in our data set that spoke about segmentation or integration as ideal type. So these were people who said, yes, I may be working at home, but my working day starts at 8 or 8:30, and then I work till about 5 or 5:30. Well, I'll do some extra hours if I have to. And same person said, well, I do work in my daughter's old bedroom, but you know, that is my workspace. I don't use it for anything else. And no, I've got my technological equipment for work only. So clear segmenter here. And he related an incident that highlighted how uncomfortable he was when a work meeting took place in a garden centre where he often went with his wife, and he clearly stated how uncomfortable he felt and that it wasn't right for him doing that because his preference was so much about keeping work and keeping non-work separately. On the other hand, we also had people very much the integrating type who said, what do you mean work, non-work? Just doesn't make any sense. I work whenever, wherever. In the morning, I wake up, I go on my laptop, then I might have a shower and breakfast. I'll go back to my laptop. Yeah, I work in bed, on the sofa, in addition to the office, whatever, you know, what are you on about? So we found that, and, you know, that's good to hear that there is something in our findings, but actually it wasn't desperately exciting. But then we also found people who we put in the category variability, who said, well, actually, for me, it's really important to have this home working space where I have a room in my own home where I can shut the door and leave work in there. The same person then said, well, actually, I start very early. It was to do with her roles. She was a social media consultant, so she was checking social media accounts for her clients. So that meant doing it early on and then intermittently during the day and quite a lot in the evening. So she had almost sort of a split shift kind of working day. So she said, oh yeah, that's absolutely fine. I get up, I do my social media stuff, I'll have shower breakfast, I'll do more social media stuff. Then things are quiet over lunchtime. So I might go out and meet a friend in a cafe somewhere. And then I go back to work, come back to work at some point in the late afternoon. And then I'll continue after having supper. So you can see space was very much segmenting. I need my own office space at home, whereas time seemed to be much more integrating. Oh yeah, I might meet a friend, I'll do a bit more work, etc. With objects was really interesting because she told us that she sometimes worked in a cafe that she also visits with friends. So she said, well, if I go there with friends, I'll be sitting on a table, fairly close to the entrance, back to a wall so that it's open, it's welcoming, I see what's going on around me. Whereas if I go there on my own, I'll select the smallest table, the furthest away from the entrance, ideally in a corner. I put my headphones on to get me in the zone, and I just hope nobody disturbs me. So she was using that space of the cafe and things like tables and headphones in very different ways. So she distinguished there very clearly that some things like headphones are work objects, whereas that's not something she would use privately. So what we found then was a mix of some segmenting and some integrating preferences. And interestingly, in contrast to the work predicting conflict, she seemed to be quite happy with this. And there were a number of other examples that similarly mix different categories. So as some said, actually, I do need my working day in terms of time, but I'm quite happy where I'm working, or saying, actually, if I don't want to be disturbed, I'll switch my smartphone off, even though that may mean my family can't get hold of me. So there were different variations there, but we thought that was really quite interesting, that absence of conflict and almost that creativity in configuring working practices in a particular way. But then there were some others, and that's the ones we find most fascinating, because these are people who say, well, actually, in some situations, I draw the line very clearly. In other situations, I don't care much about if work and non-work intermingles. So there's one lovely example, certainly I think it's lovely. It's an academic who's married with school-age children, who says, well, in the morning when we get up, it's all about family. And I tell my kids off if they go onto their smartphones, because that's not what you do first thing in the morning. So, we do get ready, and it's practicing instruments and breakfast and packing bags and lunch boxes, etc. And once they're out of the house, I have a little tidying ritual, and then I go to work. So switch on the laptop, get paperwork out, and then I start work. In the evening, sort of similar scenario, although more emails were sneaking in at the end of the working day. But she was quite clear, this is sort of in terms of time, morning time is family, and then it's work. So we can see some segmentation there. She also told us she had a study, but she didn't use it, so was working on the dining table instead. But she had this little tidying ritual to, in her mind, transform the family dining table into her workspace. And that might be as simple as moving everything aside, wiping it, and then sort of that symbolic act of laptop, papers, pens, whatever else she needed for her job going on. And in the evening, the same ritual backwards. And we've had several people telling us that. So there's clearly some changes going on in how they think about the artifact of the family dining table. Similarly, with her mobile phone, this person said, oh, I never take my phone into the bedroom because a phone is a work object. I check my emails on there, but the bedroom is absolutely nothing to do with work. I wouldn't work in my bedroom, and I deliberately leave my phone outside of there so that I'm not being tempted. That doesn't sound too exciting, but then she starts telling us that on a Wednesday afternoon, her daughter had hockey practice, and she would go with her daughter there, take her laptop, sit in the cafe next to the hockey field and do some work while watching her daughter train with her team. Now, there's a clear intermingling here between work and non-work. This could be pure family time with, we called the lady Daphne, with Daphne just accompanying her daughter, watching her, having a nice cup of tea, relaxing, spending proper family time with her daughter, albeit at the distance between cafe and hockey field. But she doesn't do that. She deliberately brings her laptop to do work in a public space that could equally be a leisure space. And we had big discussions. Is, what kind of time is it? Is it family time? Is it not family time? What is she doing there? And I've tried the same thing when I had to watch my daughter's swimming lessons a few years ago, and it certainly didn't work because I couldn't really concentrate on the swimming and I couldn't concentrate on work either. So for me, it was an absolute failure. But we still thought that was really interesting, that some people have these clear boundaries in the morning, in the evening, but then they just mix everything up. And at first we thought maybe it's just a few, but actually there were quite a lot of them who said, no, that's perfectly fine. And again, there was no conflict whatsoever. So I think that what I told you on the last slide and also this slide helps us to explain a bit why some people absolutely hate working from home. These people are probably segmentors who have this preference for work being in a particular workspace for a particular point in time, using objects that are only associated with work, such as a desktop computer or a phone that is in the workplace. And of course, they will have really struggled during enforced home working during COVID-19. And that's not to say that they're wrong or make any value judgments. It's just the way they work. They have this natural preference for working in a particular way that just wasn't possible during the pandemic for a greater good. Now, those people, I guess, I can't prove it, but I guess, who say, love working from home, couldn't do more of it, probably have a strong tendency or preference for integration, where they say, actually, if I work from home, I can maybe do some exercise over lunch or go for a walk, things that you can't necessarily do in the office. So, and again, that's no value judgment. I'm not saying these people are skiving. I think they're working equally hard as everyone else. But they work differently, and they're quite happy to have this longer working day interspersed with some me time. So I think with people with sort of in between, we put in the variability and fluidity category, they may fall either in the I love working from home, want to do it all the time, or more in the category of people saying, actually, there is a benefit in this hybrid model with me spending some time in the office to do collaborative tasks. And a lot of us whose creativity and work and inspiration really depends on conversations, and often serendipitous conversations that we have in the office, while still needing some time to really focus on more intellectually challenging tasks that can be difficult to do with all the distractions in the office. So I think I'm running out of time. As I said at the beginning, I invited you to reflect on what you are doing. So now I think is a good opportunity at this point in the pandemic, as we're hopefully moving to more normality and hopefully more people being able to work from their regular workplace, to think about how do you use time to structure your day? Do you prefer segmenting or more integrating practices, or maybe you're doing both and you're quite happy with that? How do you use space for work? Are you preferring a more segmenting or integrating practice, or like all the people in our fluidity category, are you quite happy with both? And the same for objects. But then I think with all these reports of overwork and stress and people not being able to switch off when working from home because it's so convenient, and I've just had some vibration on my mobile phone and I've got my work email streamed on here and I sometimes curse it. It's so easy to sit on the sofa and go, oh, I'll just have a quick look at that email. And then you think, oh, yeah, that sounds important. Let's just quickly answer. It again gets us away from actually managing that boundary between what's work and what isn't, and sucking us in. That's a term used by some of our research participants, sucking us into work when actually we don't want to work, when we may be tired and it's time we'd better spend on things we have fun with and we love, or obviously our loved ones. So as we are in this transition point, I encourage you to think about what is working for you and what isn't. And I think anything that is working, we should retain within the constraints of our work and our workplace. And the things that aren't working for us, we ought to change, again, within the constraints of what we are doing. So is there a better way to use time to structure your working day, or to use space or objects differently? And if you find actually something isn't working at the moment, what can you do to change it so that it works better for you? Or if you think actually working from home, these and these elements work much, much better for me, how can you maybe use that wriggle room many of us have around our job roles and employer expectations to retain some of what we feel is working for us? So thank you very much for listening, and thank you also for all of those who have followed my invitation to reflect on their practices. And I think it's over to you now, and I'll stop sharing my screen so that I can see the chat and also people. Thank you.
Thank you, Stefanie. That was fascinating, and it really resonated with me, I'm sure with others as well. So we now have a little bit of time for questions and also, I guess, comments and reflections on the topic. So who would like to start?
Can I ask a question, Anna?
Of course.
Okay, thank you. So thank you, Stefanie. That was really interesting. And I like the way you've kind of used a theory to, to come up with that model. So they're mostly, did you say segmentors or segmenters? I'm not sure of the word that you use, but so they seem to prefer the segmentation basically, whereas I think I'm more of an integrator. Because I'm the one that does the yoga and goes for the walk and then prolongs my working day. But I'm just interested, and the reason I'm asking this, I'm just analysing my own data for a project on people working reduced hours and how they're now working at home during the pandemic. And so they're a certain level in an organisation, certain age group. And I'm just wondering, what's the profile of the people that you researched for this project? What's the age profile, what was the gender profile, and how many people were there? So I'm just interested in that, really.
Yeah. Can I just answer your first point, and that is, well, Nipperding found that there were more segmentors than integrators. Integrators. So I'm not sure this still holds true. So I think what we found in our study 25 years on almost is that people seemed much happier with more integration. So I don't know if it's to do with how the world of work is conceived, or people maybe leading busier lives, different lives. Also, I think mobile ICTs have a big role in there, because they have opened up space to work more flexibly, work on the go, than was the case then. I think also with Nipedeng studying laboratory workers and us studying knowledge workers, that also has a role here. So I think there's certainly a shift from what she did to what we did. And I think it would be fascinating to have a larger scale survey to really see how people identify with these two big categories. We had 28 people from their 20s to their 60s, with the majority being in their late 30s and their 40s. So it's usually, I don't have the gender, I think it's many more women than men. And again, that might be an explanatory factor here with having to, and I've been there, go to school assembly in the afternoon and all these things. I think that might explain it, with just women having to juggle more things, maybe not thinking too much, or having less time to think about, do I really want this? They just get on with it. I think certainly that's what I'm observing around me with other women. Yeah. And it was interesting that certainly men, even though we've got a very small sample, so it's not statistically representative, but more men seem to be segmentors and integrators, whereas women seem to be much happier with a greater degree of integration.
Yeah, I would have said that would be my hunch. Yeah. Thank you. Thanks, Stefanie.
Welcome.
Yeah, I've got not so much a question, but just it was really interesting, so thank you. But yeah, I was working through your questions and thinking kind of what I'm like and what I used to be like, I think. So I think before the pandemic, I definitely would have been more of a segmenter, especially with time. Like if it got to 5:30, like obviously I'd never have a meeting or a call after then, and I probably wouldn't do work. Yeah. And I used to work from home anyway, like a couple of days a week. So I'd be in the office when I wanted to talk to colleagues, or we had team meetings, and then I concentrated really well when I was at home and was able to focus. Well, I have 2 young children now, and I'm actually on maternity leave. And I'm very lucky, I've got my own office upstairs, but I can still hear them downstairs. I still know they're there. I still have the guilt. So actually I'm thinking, oh, when I go back to work, I don't know how well I'll be able to work upstairs. And I'm sure obviously, you know, this last year when everyone was working during the pandemic, that's changed massively, like, you know, how I used to work, how I used to be able to segment things. Yeah. And then I think you said as well, like, I think another big change would be, you know, my company has been incredibly flexible and adaptable with this, and they said, look, just kind of work when you can, kind of thing. So I kind of feel like they've been incredibly like understanding of people in the company with childcare in particular, but other, you know, issues and demands on their time. So then you feel like, well, they let me take an hour or 2 off during the day, so it's only fair that I then make that up at the end of the day. Whereas before I definitely could segment it a lot easier, and now I just don't think it's possible. And you know how I work. So yeah, it was really interesting to see kind of the different types and how you've changed, you know, people will change with that.
Yeah, and I mean, we didn't have enough people in different age categories simply because we had a relatively limited number of interviewees. But I think one thing we were wondering about, if there's actually an age factor there as well, so that women in their 30s and 40s with childcare, or more of us, I think, will have caring commitments towards elderly parents as we get older. So, you know, moving into the 50s, whether there's just a certain necessity to integrate more. Whereas I think once the kids are out of the house and, you know, you can focus a bit more on yourself, there might be more of a tendency towards segmentation, with people saying, actually, it's luxury now because I'm able to do that. So I would guess that age will be a factor in how people organize things at different points in their lives.
Yeah, definitely.
And certainly I've learned a lot about myself and how incongruent I am all the way through. So
I think it's really interesting what you said about the commute. So I'm not missing the commuting to work, but I actually miss the commute coming back home. So I've got, I'm finding it really difficult to switch off. So I actually started going for a walk after work to give myself that sort of temporal but also spatial boundary between my work day and then the rest of my day.
Absolutely, and I think that's something that's come up in the research, and also the example of converting the dining table into a workspace and back. So these rituals are incredibly important. I mean, the dining table still stays the dining table, but it just changes something, how we think about it and how we use it. And one was very clear, said, I would not tolerate anyone sitting at the dining table when I'm working, because that is my workspace. And I would not tolerate my laptop once it's become the family dining table again. So I think it really highlighted how many different ways we can make sense of the things around us and how we use them. And these rituals, and I think also that spatial thing, closing a door behind me, that was one thing that a lot of people have mentioned. So there seems to be something about very spatial about having that door as a physical barrier between work and non-work. That seemed to be really, really important. And I had one interview saying actually having a home office was something I put in the design when we planned this house. It was a barn conversion. He said I couldn't do it otherwise. But then at the same time, he was saying, oh, and by the way, when I'm thinking of working from home, I also think about the family dog who lies to my feet. And when I've got a video call, he starts howling. So I associate that with work. And you just think, okay, yeah, that's an interesting one.
I think it's also interesting, like, that's great if you can plan in a home office and, or have a spare room that you can use as an office. But I know particularly during the pandemic, like young people in a flat share, like my worst nightmare would be to work in the bedroom. But if you don't have a choice, if you can't even use the kitchen table because you're sharing it with, however many other people, and then you can't close the door, and you have, your work and living and literally sleeping space becomes everything, doesn't it? So
absolutely, and that's why I think sort of the way in which we think about things becomes really important. And tidying rituals was something that several people mentioned, because otherwise it would be distracted. If there's a dirty cup on the sink and I can see that from the dining table, I can't work. So, and I think there are probably ways in which, even if we have to work in our own bedroom and do everything in that single room, there are probably ways in which we can help ourselves distance from that through the way we use objects as much as possible. But you're absolutely right. And I read this article about home working in a German news outlet. Was someone saying, actually, I have video calls on the toilet because that's the only quiet space I can get in the house with two of us working from home. And part of me was tickled and part of me felt really sad. I'm thinking, really? I said, oh yeah, and then my husband might bring me a cup of tea into the bathroom. And you just think, too much detail here. But I think we are those who have this dedicated workspace are incredibly lucky, and I don't underestimate how hard it is for many colleagues. And I know I've had, certainly at the beginning, calls with people in a kitchen full of dirty dishes, and I felt utterly distracted by just looking at these dirty dishes, because I couldn't work like that, but that was the only space the person had available.
Yeah, I think, Stefanie, there's because my study's focusing on execs and senior managers, I think there's a bit of a hierarchy, because looking at the data, oh yeah, I've got an office at home, I've got all the equipment, and it would be interesting actually for a study to look at the different sort of privileges that people had at work and how those continue. I guess people that earn more, we associate them maybe with bigger spaces at home and nice gardens maybe, and I don't know, you've got me thinking about that actually. I think there could definitely be a hierarchy there.
I think so, and I think there's been certainly news items I picked up around inequality, societal inequality, with the haves and the have-nots, with the haves being able to work flexibly and the have-nots not being able to work flexibly, and exposing themselves to the virus throughout the pandemic. And I think the same then goes through living spaces, with the haves maybe having the luxury of the space and the have-nots living in cramped accommodation, not having the technological means etc. So, you know, I think these are really, really important themes or issues that the pandemic has highlighted. And I've also heard from house builders, house developers actually thinking much more about how can we design houses so that there is an opportunity to squeeze some kind of desk into a corner. There have also been thoughts around broadband and broadband provision, so that if people do work from home and two people may be in a call on the same time, the broadband actually doesn't go down. So yeah, I think it's really made us rethink a lot of what we taken for granted, not just about work, but also how we live and how society functions.
Yeah, I think so, yeah.
Stefanie,
Yes.
I'm interested because obviously in our sector we have some really different types of working. So we have you know, that kind of clerical type of space, you know, even, you know, say maybe in the design area of engineering, you know, you know, you do need very powerful laptops, you know, to access all the software. But, you know, technically the companies have been looking at being able to get people to work from home. But of course, there are other areas like the maintenance hangars, you know, the airline, airport industry type roles, very hands-on. And, you know, at the moment, a lot of those people have been furloughed, and so when they come back to work they may find their colleagues are all in very different sort of scenarios, because, you know, some might be more blended working, some might have to, you know, can only come into the office or into the, you know, to the actual location and work. So it would be interesting to sort of like compare now how people maybe make their career choices, you know, because as you say, I think what we've found particularly for our staff is it does depend, age is a big part of it, you know. Younger, you tend to see work as a kind of social place, you know, somewhere where you're going to make friends and, you know, for life. But then obviously as you move through your family, you know, circumstances change. But I wonder if that will kind of influence how people make their career decisions, you know, whether they go for more practical roles because they want to be somewhere where they can't work from home, if you see what I mean, while others start to think about the long term, you know, and actually I need to be thinking 10, 15 years ahead, which not everyone does when they're young. You know, it takes you a long time, doesn't it, to know where you're going to be in life.
Yeah, no, I think that's a really good point. And again, I think it's something we will be seeing as we move forward, and, you know, maybe in the next 5 years. I mean, certainly reflecting on our students, I'm not sure they're planning that much. I think their planning horizon is my first job, because they're in so much well, they have many opportunities to redirect their career. Whereas I think if you are an engineer, for example, that requires more investment at the study stage, because you have to qualify as an engineer in order to do more engineering type roles. So yeah, it'll be interesting to see. But then I suppose more and more of us with automation are doing more paperwork. So, you know, there may be opportunities to work to core hours and then move some of the paperwork more into the home space, if that is something that works for people and the organization. But yeah, I think it's really exciting times, even though it was a very, very challenging year, I think, for everyone. To see how this changes society as we move on. Not sure I've answered your question.
No, I think it's almost like you say, it's almost a what's next, isn't it? How is it going to, you know, what's the next phase? You know, as you were saying, Susan, it's, you know, what you did before is similar but different to what you'll do when you come back to work as well. It'll be interesting to see how you find it, having sort of had that flexible approach, but having it in a different way. And I'm similar, except for I've carried on right through the crisis. But, you know, I had sort of one work from home day before, but now, you know, I've really enjoyed, to be honest, I feel terrible in a way, because I've really enjoyed a lot of the aspects of being able to be at home and more time with family and things that I didn't get before. But at the same time, you know, you've got to accept that it's not the same for everybody, and you've got to try and get a system. And that's what's difficult, I think, is getting a system of different people at different stages in their life. And as you say, the integrators versus the segmenters, you know, how we can all work together and, you know, get that right balance as well. It's going to be really interesting but challenging.
Yeah, and I think also coordinating people, because, you know, once you say, oh, on a Monday everyone has to come to the office, you're already limiting some of the flexibility. But you know, these times of everyone being in the office together are so important for weaving that social fabric of a team or an organization, and having spaces and opportunities for everyone to be there in the same room, even though I've been working from home for a long time, doing less so on screen, but it's really something, it's different when you're in the same room with someone than when you're just on screen. And I can't put my finger on it, but it's very different dynamics then. And sort of that coordination of who is in the office when, particularly as we're hearing about organizations reducing the number of desks, will be very, very interested, because all of a sudden we can't have 100 people in the office. We only have space for 80 or 50 or however many. So again, I think it's a really, really exciting time to, well, certainly from a research point of view, I think less so from doing it, about how we make this all work.
It's going to be like musical chairs, isn't it? So, those working mums who have arranged kids' parties.
Absolutely.
Maybe those skills will come into play, yeah.
I think what's also important, and again, I feel very lucky, so our company sent out a survey asking us what we wanted to do. Like, do we want to be back in the office? Do we want to carry on work? It was, and I thought that's, great. We actually, I'm not, they've been flexible before, so I think we will have the choice then. And even, we've got 3 locations, and would you, be happy working in another location altogether almost? So, I think if it's possible, I think it'd be great if other companies could do something similar, because I also read a news article about, the banking and finance sector, that on the 21st of June, that's it. Everyone 100% has to be back in the office, even though they've coped perfectly well this last year, and they want them back anyway. So I feel very lucky again that we've actually been asked what we want to do.
I've heard of someone who had to take or sent pictures to his boss of several points in the working day to prove that he was working, during the pandemic, which is just absolutely ludicrous. I think the way round I heard was taking them all very sort of on one morning, just wearing different things and moving things around the background so that it looks as different days. But it's just, you think, why are organizations doing this? And then you hear from other organizations who say, no, we can save so much if we reduce the number of desks, if we reduce the number of locations, so everyone has to do it. If it's right for people or not doesn't really matter in a way, because it's all about business and money and profit. So yeah, I think it's sad to still see this we know best kind of approach, rather than really doing what many organizations claim, and that is work with their people. And people are our greatest assets. How many job adverts do you read where something along those lines isn't in there? But it's just not happening in many organizations. So I think those of us who are in these organizations are incredibly lucky.
Great. Does anyone else have any other questions or experiences to share? We're also approaching the 6 o'clock.
Well, thank you very much, Susan and Rosalind, for your questions and comments.
Yeah, no, it's been a really interesting, and like you say, it's probably just the beginning. Sue, you were going to do, Sue Durban, so you were going to do a bit of a wrap up for us, weren't you? And just to thank you formally as well to Stefanie. So
thanks, Ros. I think my video's on. Yeah. So yes, thank you, Stefanie. I've really enjoyed your presentation. I think you're raising a really important issue here, and I think you're helping us to understand it from different perspectives. I think that's what I find really interesting, and I just think your research is fascinating, and I really do feel we're going to see, there's not a lot has come out yet. I mean, I've seen quite a lot of industry reports, but academic wise, I think, excuse me, I think the floodgates are going to open at some point, but I think people at the moment are doing the research and writing it up. So I'm sure we're going to see much more, and I hope you see more of your research in regards to that. But I think it'd be interesting to see what this new normal is going to look like. So many people have been working from home and in different ways, and loving it, hating it, and how organizations are going to deal with this. I really don't know, but my understanding is that productivity has increased for a lot of organizations. So, you know, this lack of trust, that example you gave earlier, you know, that really is a problem, isn't it? And, you know, maybe that employer should read about the productivity increasing rather than decreasing. But I think, you know, we have to learn to trust each other a bit more. And, you know, whatever we work into our working day, as long as we do our, you know, achieve what we're supposed to achieve for our employers, then what does it matter? So yeah, I'm interested in that new normal. And I think we really need to think about the ones who are being left behind and are really struggling. And I think, you know, that's where I'd like to see more research focusing upon, although mine is at the other end of the spectrum. You know, I'd like to contrast that with, as you say, the haves and the have-nots. I think that's a really good point. So thank you again, Stefanie, and I hope you're presenting to us. We've had some great questions, a really good discussion, and yeah, thank you for spending the time tonight to come and talk to alta.
Thank you for having me. I hope it's been helpful, certainly, to think on everyone's practice as we move forward, and maybe also have the language to talk about it, because sometimes I think it's that lack of language of just explaining and expressing why things may be different for different people. So yeah, I found boundary theory very helpful in that respect, to make sense, certainly myself, of the conversations I'm hearing, but also what is coming out of the research. So I hope you found it helpful too for your own ways. It was a pleasure to be with you, and if there's any questions, please do let me know. I'm happy to share the slides if that would be helpful. So Anna, if that's the case, please let me know.
Thank you very much, and we'll close there. We've just come up to 6 o'clock, so we'll close the event. Thank you very much.
Thanks a lot. I'll leave the meeting then.
Bye.
Bye.
Bye. Bye.
Bye everyone. Thank you.